Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Texas Business Court Insider. I'm Kate Ergenbright, and today with me is Rachel Roosth. We're going to be discussing the developments in the Texas Business Court's first 6 months of its second year.
That's right, Kate. On February 28, 2026, the Texas Business Court completed 18 months in operation. During that time, its caseload has grown, its jurisdiction has expanded, it has issued significant written opinions, and in recent months, it has started holding trials.
So we have a lot of ground to cover today. And let's start with the big picture story on filings, because the numbers here are pretty striking. Rachel, what do the numbers tell us about the court's caseload these days?
Well, let's start with the first year for some context. In the business court's first year, 185 cases were filed, with almost half of those in the 11th Division in Houston and about a quarter in the 1st Division in Dallas. But what's really interesting is comparing those numbers to the beginning of the second year of the court's operation. In just the first 6 months of the court's second year, that's September 2025 through the end of February 2026, 143 cases were filed in the business court. So that's nearly 80% of the entire first year's total filings in just half the time.
That's some real acceleration, Rachel. Is that growth distributed evenly across all divisions?
No, it's not. The 1st, 3rd, and 11th divisions have seen the highest growth rates. Those are the courts based in Dallas, Austin, and Houston. But at the 18-month mark, the 4th and 8th divisions, which are based in San Antonio and Fort Worth, were actually on pace to see fewer filings in their second year than their first year. So there is still meaningful geographic variation here. Now, Kate, some of this increased caseload could be due to the expansion of the court's jurisdiction. Can you tell us about the legislative change that made that happen?
Sure, Rachel. House Bill 40 is the bill that most recently expanded the business court's jurisdiction. It went into effect on September 1st of 2025, and it expanded the court's jurisdiction in two important ways. First, it lowered the qualified transaction amount in controversy threshold from $10 million to $5 million. And it added concurrent jurisdiction over intellectual property claims, claims under the Texas Uniform Trade Secret Act, and arbitration-related disputes.
Kate, lowering the amount in controversy seems pretty straightforward, but what constitutes an intellectual property claim is perhaps not as obvious.
That's true, Rachel. There was an interesting decision in the Alamo title case that interpreted the relevant statutory provisions related to intellectual property jurisdiction pretty broadly. In that case, the claims that were filed were for tortious interference and aiding and abetting breach of fiduciary duty. There was no claim for misappropriation of trade secrets, but the allegations supporting tortious interference and aiding and abetting breach of fiduciary duty did allege misappropriation of confidential and proprietary information like customer lists. And the court found that those claims still related to the ownership or use of intellectual property and fell under the court's intellectual property jurisdiction. Now, Rachel, let's shift focus and turn to the court's first trials. What can you tell us about the business court's first trial?
Well, the first trial was in the Marathon Oil v. Mercuria case. It was a bench trial held in November of 2025. That case was filed in the 11th Division in Houston, but through the court's exchange of benches procedure, Judge Melissa Andrews of the 3rd Division presided over the case.
And what was that case about?
I'll try not to get too into the weeds here, but Mercuria alleged Marathon owed Mercuria many millions of dollars for failure to deliver natural gas during Winter Storm Uri in 2021. Marathon argued that it was excused by the party's force majeure clause.
And how did that trial shake out?
Well, there was a 4-day bench trial, and then Judge Andrews issued a ruling in favor of Marathon. She granted Marathon's declaratory judgment that it did not owe damages to Mercuria, and she found that Marathon made reasonable efforts to avoid the adverse impacts of this force majeure event and to resume performance, and therefore it was excused from its failure to perform. But she also determined that it would not be equitable and just to require Mercuria to pay Marathon's attorney's fees. So Marathon won on the merits, but did not get the fee shifting that it requested. Kate, why don't you tell us about some of the other milestone business court trials?
Sure. The business court held 2 jury trials in February. The first one was in the Powers versus Berry case. That jury trial began February 10th of 2026 in the 11th Division in Houston, with Judge Sophia Ergenbright presiding.
Kate, what was that Powers case about and who won?
Well, the dispute centered on ownership and management rights in a crude oil delivery project potentially worth up to $1 billion. The jury found a valid contract, giving the plaintiff 1/5 ownership in the venture and management rights, and the jury calculated attorney's fees at $2.4 million. The jury also rejected counterclaims that the plaintiff had breached fiduciary duties and failed to perform his end of the bargain.
Kate, what about the second jury trial? Can you give us a brief overview of that case?
The Quintero case was technically the second jury trial, and it was filed in the First Division in Dallas, with Judge Andrea Baressa presiding over the case. The trial began on February 17th of 2026, but the jury never got to decide the case because the judge granted the defendant's motion for a directed verdict. I think it's important to note that this directed verdict didn't come out of nowhere. The court had previously narrowed the issues before trial using a Rule 166G to grant an early summary judgment. So by the time that case got to trial, the plaintiff was already working with a significantly narrowed case.
That's right, Kate. And I think what this shows is that the Texas Business Court is moving these cases along, whether it's by summary judgment, directed verdict, a full trial, or some combination of those. This court is ready and able to usher these complex business disputes to a resolution.
So, Rachel, we've covered at a high level where the court stood at the 18-month mark. But looking ahead, are there any particular developments you're looking out for or hoping to see?
Yeah, as the number of trials increase, I hope we'll see some dedicated courtroom space for the business courts, but we'll have to watch the legislature and see if they make that happen. There's also recently been a challenge to the court's constitutionality, and there haven't been a lot of, developments or briefing on that issue yet, but I'm interested to see how that plays out.
Me too, Rachel. And of course, here at Texas Business Court Insider, we'll be keeping an eye on those issues and more. So to our viewers, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next video.
And check out the Texas Business Court Insider Hub using the link below. It has articles, prior episodes, and resources to help you navigate this court. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.